Women of Color conference there at Cal State Long Beach. And so that was one way that like this idea of homophobia really motivated my life. And then when I was in graduate school at Santa Cruz, I co-founded the Queer Latina Network, which ended up being like 50 queer Latinas on campus, some of them out, some of them not out. And it was undergraduates, graduate students, staff, and faculty who can all come together and just talk about who they are. And, you know, we took a trip to Mexico one time for this lesbian march. And so for me, it's like that's my way of dealing with it is building around it to squash it. Mm-hmm.
So, were there any, is there any particular incidences that you still remember where someone was, you know, being mean towards you just because they're homophobic?
Yeah, I remember there's been a few times when I've been called dyke, you know, on the street, in Los Angeles and in Santa Cruz. I feel a lot of homophobia or like looks and stares sometimes within the Mexican American community, especially when I had short hair. I used to have really short hair, sideburns like a man, like a boy, and I would dress more masculine. And in those moments, I would really feel, you know, the hatred. Either at the clothing stores or at even, you know, just like at family parties sometimes, it would be really intense. The looks that I would get. I never experienced physical violence, but I definitely experienced words and energy. And yeah, those are some of the main ways. And then also just just in public spaces, just like the looks, or also like sometimes people not wanting to trust their children around you. I think that's one of the ones that's the most hurtful because I'm really like this like loving person, and sometimes I feel like people get scared when they find out that I'm queer around their children, and that's just that's a hard one for me to accept, you know. So yeah.
So, who did you feel were to blame for how they acted towards you?
That's a good question. I feel like I don't necessarily blame people, but I feel like what I ask is for people to start doing their work to question why they think like that. You know, like, why do you even feel scared around me or threatened by my masculinity or how I look or how I carry myself or how I identify or who I love, you know? So I feel like I don't blame the people. I think more it's a societal construction, like a social construction that we have adapted to. And so I've always sort of been a feminist, even though I didn't always have the words for it. And in the same way that I think about how patriarchy exists and like this male dominance, I think also homophobia exists and this hatred against queer people. And so I think it's something that we adapt to, that's in society, and we think that that's the right way to believe and to act. And so I really think it's sort of embedded in how we exist as a society, and so for me it's about like I feel like I try to love people no matter what, even if there's violence there. But I think that also my personal work on this earth is to provoke those questions. You know, like, how did you come to that thought? Like, what makes you feel like it's okay to judge another person based on who they love or not love, and or how they look and not look? You know. So so I would say it's more a legacy, and I feel now in my what I've learned is that it's sort of this legacy of colonization and colonialism and imperialism, because I feel like that's when these hierarchies entered, and they started to say, you know, this race is better than this race, this sexuality is better than this sexuality, you know, like, so I feel like when these hierarchies entered around race, gender, sexuality, that's when, from that time, or from there is where I feel like the legacies have continued onto now. I don't know if that's clear, but I feel like, so it's like our society is still connected to that violence of that time.
So how has the media affected your comfort with your identity?
You know, I sort of have a love-hate relationship with the media, because for example, like the images that I showed you all of Laura Aguilar in class, her photography, like in that moment I love media because it's another representation that's way outside of what I'm used to, and it helps me feel validated, like it helps me feel represented. And so in that sense, I love it. And I love taking pictures, and I love also like films like Two Spirits or Pura Lengua that represent an alternative to the mainstream, right? So in that sense, I love media, but the mainstream media like MTV or just even what's on regular television or on billboards, I really feel like that there's so much perpetuation of stereotypes that are very hurtful. And stereotypes, you know, based on race, based on sexuality, and even when they're trying to break barriers, I think it's still limited. I feel like we have a long ways to go in terms of media and what's available and what's out there for everyone to feel connected and comfortable with it. And I feel like sometimes we get trained. I feel like we get trained by the media, like what we see as beautiful, what we see as healthy, what we see as what we want to aspire to. And for me as a little girl, I never saw myself in the media represented. You know, I never felt connected to not even Spanish TV or representations. Like the soap operas there, always very heteronormative, always very violent and dramatic, and I never felt myself connected to them, even if they were in Spanish. And in English, it was like, you know, there was never a queer person on TV when I was growing up. Very rarely was there anyone who was Latina or Latino. And even now, it's like maybe the only show that I connect to, or one of the only shows I connect to, is like Ugly Betty. That's something that I feel like they had actually positive queer representation with her with Ugly Betty's nephew. But I feel like there's a lot of sort of damage that comes from media because it's so focused on consumption of this like perfect body, perfect image, American life that's not real, and or doesn't feel real to me anyways, because I've never, you know, I don't have the money, I don't have that body, I don't have the white skin, you know, and so it's like I don't have that sexuality that's normative, and so I've always felt very outside of representations. But then again, like I'm saying, there's these alternative cultures of representation and media that I feel like I have found home in, you know, and I feel like I just wish that they could get out there, the independent forms of media that are non-corporate. And so, for example, I get a lot of my news from Democracy Now!, and that's a space where it's all supported by the listeners and there's no corporate sponsorship. And so in that media, like I feel like I can connect to it and find truth versus, you know, the television, which I feel like rarely do I ever feel like, oh, I enjoyed watching that, you know? So.
So, how do you think the media influences people's perspective of the LGBT community?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like right now, have our representations that are very limited, even though they're a lot more, for example, than when I was young and growing up. I still think it's very white, and I still think it's very middle class for the most part. And then after that, I feel like it's sensationalized. So, for example, we'll see the drag queen, but we won't see a drag king. You know, we'll see a M to F person, right? The drag queen, but we won't see a F to M, right? The drag king. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very sensationalized what we see, and I think also like this representation like around like AIDS, for example. Like AIDS is very much thought about like a male of color, especially disease, which it is. But I think also what we don't see is that it also affects women of color. It also affects like different populations, you know. So I think that the representations that we have are very limited, and they don't allow our awareness to grow because they're very stereotypical. So I don't feel challenged by media. Like I don't feel like media is doing the work. The mainstream media is not doing the work to get us to think deeper. I think mainstream media the purpose of it feels more like to put people at ease and to feel comfortable in their bodies, but it doesn't challenge them to actually think about their bodies or bodies that are different from theirs, you know. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in every culture, sexuality, and how all those intersections come together, there's so many different types of people. There's so many different ways that we relate to each other and speak, and I just feel like we need a lot more of that available to us, you know. Yeah. And it's interesting with reality TV, how a lot of the TV went to reality TV, how that was supposed to get us closer to people, but I think also it does in some way, you know, but I think there's still limitations around it, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think the media relates to or promotes homophobia?
How does it promote it? Well, I think by just not showing difference,
I don't know, but for some reason.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, keep going.
Oh, okay. I think the way it just doesn't.
Okay, go ahead.
Uh-oh.
What happened?
Oh, I just keep hearing the feedback, I think. Okay, all right, no problem. So I think it's just a way that that difference is not represented in a variety of form is the main thing. Like, so for example, like Audre Lorde, it's interesting because I was listening to Obama's acceptance speech on the night of the election, and he said a lot of things that are almost exact words from Audre Lorde's writing, like just around the importance of difference, the importance of moving forward in solidarity with people. And those are not his exact words, but what I'm saying is that you would never see someone like Audre Lorde, who was this, you know, black lesbian mother revolutionary on TV, you know. So I think that just not allowing the difference to show up, I think, is part of the way that it's hurtful towards the LGBTQ community. So I think allowing for, I think if media just allowed for the contradictions, maybe that's what I want to say, so that people don't necessarily have to agree or be the same, but to show different voices, and literally different voices, like not just like one person from the Black community, one person from the Asian American community, one person from the Native, one person from the Latinos. That's not what I mean. I mean like literally allowing people from the same communities to have different opinions and to show that there's difference, you know, and then from there allow like the next conversation from that. Does that make sense?
Yes. So when the differences are, shown in the media, how do you think the LGBT community is portrayed?
Well, I feel like I haven't really seen that too much. Only in alternative forms of media. And when it is shown, it's like it's shown in the way where, we can see that people are intellectuals. We can see that people are poets. I think that people who are artists are very rarely represented, like really doing visionary art that are speaking to transformation and social change. I think those representations are rarely shown. So I feel like if there was a moment where we started to see that media representation, then we would see, like, for example, representations of people representing their own ancestry. That to me is powerful. When I have been fortunate to see somebody speaking of their ancestry or speaking of their own culture and speaking of the ways in which, like, they're LGBT in their home, which is very different from, somebody else's home or somebody else's community.
Okay. So, what do you think about sometimes in movies when they would have a male stylist or hair or a barber and he's like extremely feminine and obviously gay? Like, what do you think of that representation?
Yeah, exactly. In one sense it's good because that is something that is real. Like there are people who are gay men or queer men who do that work. But I think you're absolutely right in pointing to that as an example of an over-representation, right? Where we rarely see gay men as masculine, like as somebody who does construction work or somebody who is a professor or somebody who, like we rarely see that. So I think that's definitely an over-representation. Although one representation that I really loved of was Philadelphia. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with that film.
No, sorry.
No, that's okay. But that's it was Tom Hanks and I think Denzel Washington. And that was a really powerful representation of somebody who had HIV, and they were really trying to think outside the box, I think, around that representation.
Okay. Let's see.
And I think that's a wrap. Do you have comments or anything you would like to share with us?
Let me see. Well, I definitely feel honored to do this interview, and I hope that there was something in there that you all can use. And also to say that if you want to do any follow-up or you want me to respond by email to any questions, I can do that. Or, in person, office hours or something like that. And I guess just putting out there that I really think that it's you all, like youth, younger people who are going to have to challenge the media representations in multiple forms, like to challenge the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, the classism that we see. And even now, like, the downplay of the wars that are happening in Gaza, the one that just broke out recently. So I really feel like it's, in terms of media, I really think that we need more alternative forms of media. And I think we're all up on the internet, and we know Facebook and we know Tumblr and Twitter and all of that. But I think that we need to tap into those as ways of communicating consciousness. So not just like what's the latest, feeling or form of dress, but what's the latest, so that we can build another kind of world, I think, for the next generations to come. So that's what I would like to add.
I completely agree. That's why we're here, and that's why we're taking your class.
Yay! Right on. Well, it's an honor. Thank you very much.
so much, Susan, and thank you for taking your time on your day. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome, and I look forward to seeing how this turns out.
Okay. Oh, you have a great day, okay?
Okay, you too. Enjoy the day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.